Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have a fun interview coming your way with author and national master Dana Mackenzie. We'll get you to that in a second. First, wanted to say thanks, as always, to our sponsors, Chessable.com. Tatyev Abrahamyan, a frequent participant for the U.S. team in the Chess Olympiad and one of our top players, has a new course out on endgame studies. I, of course, wrote about endgame studies in my book. Most people think they're good for your tactical vision and creativity, and Tatyev, I knew, grew up studying them and now is sharing many of her favorites, so that's a good one to check out for intermediate to advanced players. And you can check out all of Chessable's other stuff, whether it be openings, middle games, end games, tactics. And if you sign up for Chessable Bro, use the link, not Chessable Bro, Chessable Pro, use the link in the description. So without further ado, let's get you to a fun interview with Dana Mackenzie. And we are here with a guest I am very excited to chat with, a first-time guest. He is a former mathematics professor, these days primarily a science journalist. He's also a published author, USCF National Master, a Life Master, the two-time champion of the state of North Carolina, and a blogger. And his chess blog, which ran for a long time, and a lot of people weighing in, a nice little vibrant community. It has now been turned into a book by New in Chess. The book is called Did You Come Here to Play Chess or to Have Fun? And as I dug into the book, I really enjoyed a lot of the stories, a lot of familiar names to podcast listeners, and I think a lot of good advice, both for improving your game and just sort of the eternal question of how to incorporate chess into a life that also has other priorities. So I am excited to welcome to the program Dr. and NM Dana Mackenzie. Welcome, Dana.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm very excited to talk about my new book. So fire away. What would you like to ask?
Great. Yeah. And do people... So I've been going down the rabbit hole reading Dana's book, but also he has a non-chess blog where he writes about his science writing, and he has a big post about this incredible story where he was denied tenure at Kenyon College in like a very disturbing manner. So the reason I brought that up, Dana, is I was wondering, do people still call you doctor now that you're primarily a science writer?
Right. No, I don't usually sort of mention that I have a PhD, and so most people I think don't even realize. But yeah, you know, when I was a professor, it's interesting. I was at Duke for 6 years, and there people always called me doctor. And then I went to a small liberal arts college, Kenyon College in Ohio, and my students never called me doctor there. They just called me Mr. Mackenzie or something like that. So it's interesting how different places have different different. But, you know, basically, I don't care about the title. You know, it's like sometimes people, you know, think, oh, you know, got to be so respectful, et cetera. Well, you know, it's just really a professional qualification that I have, nothing more.
Makes sense. Well, let's talk about a title that is more germane to this podcast, the National Master title. So
sure.
I thought a good place to start, and Life Master in your case, which for those from outside the United States is kind of like a mini step up, which basically means that you held the National Master title and played a certain number of games at that level, which, you know, shows longevity and dedication, which your book also shows as you played for so many years.
Yes.
But one of your posts is about sort of your core beliefs about what got you to the Master title. Could you share a few of those, Dana?
Yeah. So maybe I should first, you know, as you said, I should say that this book began as a blog, and almost all the chapters in the book were originally blog posts. Some of them have been edited a little bit, but what you're reading in the book started on the blog. So what this particular post you're referring to is called How Do You Become a Life Master? And the way it came about was that I was actually interviewed by a college student from UC Santa Cruz, which is, I live in Santa Cruz, so it's the local university. She was an anthropology student, and they'd been given this assignment to interview an older person. And it was supposed to be a person over 70. Now, I'm not over 70 yet, thank gosh, but she got special permission from her teacher to interview me because she was really interested in me as both a writer and a chess player. And one of the questions she asked me was, how do you become a life master? because she had read on my website that I am a life master. And I have to admit, I gave what I think is the worst possible answer. I said, oh, well, you need to get a rating of 2,200, and then you need to play and get 5 master norms, and then you'll become, you'll get this title of life master. And then after our interview was over and I went back home, it suddenly hit me, that wasn't what she was asking. She wanted to know, what do I do as a chess player to become that good? Or, how does, what does it take to become a life master? And so in my blog post, I wrote some of the steps that were important to me. Then, of course, one of the great things about writing a blog is the wonderful comments you get from people. So several of my readers chimed in with very interesting comments and informative ones about how they either became life masters or national masters, or how other people did, and so forth. Anyway, so to finally get to your question, in my post, I suggested 5 answers or 5 steps to becoming a life master. Okay. And so I said, number 1, eliminate tactical mistakes. So my comment here is that Class B players and below make simple tactical mistakes in most of their games. If you get to the point where 75% of your games are free of major tactical mistakes, and you spot your opponent's mistakes as well as your own, then you'll be a Class A player for sure. So that's step 1, just eliminate tactical mistakes. Okay. Step 2, learn strategic planning. Okay, so this is my step for becoming an expert or 2,000 player in USCF. And I said, once you get to the point where neither you nor your opponent are making gross blunders, then you can actually start painting coherent pictures. Start with Jeremy Silman's Reassess Your Chess and learn about imbalances, which I think is a really important concept. It also helps a lot to talk with good strategic players. I learned so much from Mike Splain and his chess parties. This is something we'll talk about more, I think, in the interviews. So he was a local master who had a chess party every month at his house. And these were such interesting and instructive occasions because we would really talk about how do you think about chess? How do you decide on moves? And even how do you decide what moves to look at? So anyway, so that's sort of strategic planning, step 2 to becoming a master. And I said that if you can form good plans that are based on concrete positional factors, not wishful thinking, and if you can execute them without changing your mind 15 times, then you'll be an expert at least. So then step 3, I wrote, develop an identity and a strength. Figure out something that you do better than most people and play to that strength. Maybe it's a particular opening. Maybe you have a special talent for bold sacrificial attacks. Or maybe you're good at patient defense, grabbing a pawn and holding on to it. Maybe you're good at rook and pawn endgames or some particular kind of endgame. Whatever it is, find something that is your ace in the hole and use it whenever you can. This will separate you from the other experts and make you a master. So it's that developing an identity, and some of my readers really like that point. And it goes actually beyond chess. One of the readers said, I was just talking with a friend of mine who wants to be a writer, and we were talking about the same thing, develop an identity. So I think this is good general advice outside of chess as well. So step 4, eliminate your weaknesses. And here, full disclosure, I wrote, this is something I haven't done yet. I haven't eliminated my time pressure or the lack of confidence that causes it. I haven't learned the art of saving lost games, which is something that masters do really well. I haven't learned the art of winning drawn positions, not just occasionally, but regularly. A real master doesn't settle unless he's playing another master in the last round, and then they'll settle for a draw really fast. Although I can't speak from experience, I think that really eliminating your weaknesses makes you a professional. That will take you to 2,300 or 2,400. And again, I got some good reader comments that kind of confirmed this. And then my last one is really speculative. I said, develop more and more strengths. I think this is what characterizes the guys who get up to 2,500 or higher. They might start knowing rook and pawn endgames, but then they turn into virtuosos in every endgame. They might, like Tao, start as an attacker and then morph into a player who never loses. Magnus Carlsen is, of course, the classic example of a player who can beat you in any type of opening or any type of game. So those are my 5 steps. The last 2, admittedly, I haven't managed to get through myself, but that was sort of my answer for chess players. And then it occurred to me, maybe she wasn't even asking as a chess player. Maybe she's just asking as an interested person, but what does it take to be a master? So someone who doesn't even play chess. And so I wrote 5 points for those people too. Said, start playing chess young. That really helps. And I know some of your listeners are starting as adults, and that's harder. It's a harder road to travel. But if you can start young, if you have some young listeners there, good for them. Play in lots of tournaments. Playing in tournaments is the best way to improve by far. So if you're kind of starting out, and maybe you've played online a little bit, you got an online rating of 1500 or something. Still, I think the place to really improve is not online, but playing in tournaments. That really forces you to get serious about the game. And study your games. 3rd point, study your games, win or loss, but especially the losses. You want to understand what happened that made you lose. 4th thing is to play stronger players and talk with stronger players. And that's something that I really came to appreciate through the chess parties that I talked about earlier. These were parties where we had 10 to 12 masters or experts, and it was so different from typical chess get-togethers where you just play speed chess until you're sort of not even seeing straight anymore. That's not a way to learn. So Mike's parties were serious discussions about, we'd show a game and then we would get questions, sometimes tough questions, and we'd talk about how did we come up with our strategies, what did we consider in a position, and there were big differences of opinion sometimes. That's one of the exciting things about it. But the point was that we were not just blowing off steam. We were actually trying to learn. All of us were trying to learn. And I just got so much from hearing other masters talk about how they think. And we can talk about this much more if you want. Talking with stronger players, not just playing, but actually talking about chess. And then the last point to becoming a life master, don't quit. So I don't feel as if I'm particularly talented, but I just kept with the game. I started tournaments in 1972. I've played for 50 years, and I think part of why I became a master is just that all the other people who started when Fischer won the world championship in this big Fischer surge, they left the game after a few years. I just kept on going. So don't get discouraged.
Yeah, there's so much good advice there. And I like that you approached the question from 2 separate ways. Of your first set of answers, I feel like are kind of like how you get from 2200, from say 1800 to 2200. These are the things you do. But then, as you say, the person who asked you is not a serious chess player.
Right.
So more broadly, like, what would you tell someone about what it takes to become a master? And for listeners outside the US, I mean, you're all probably familiar, but when we say USCF master, that's a 2200 USCF rating. So roughly equivalent to, 2000, 2100 FIDE, something like that. And I really like your first 3 pillars, getting you from 1800 to 2200, eliminate mistakes and learn strategic planning. I felt like were really good advice. Develop an identity and strength. I feel like it's good advice, but I don't know. I was thinking for myself, I did follow your tenet of starting relatively young. I started at 12 and made it to master in 6 years, but I never felt like I had a great strength. So I'm not sure if that's true for all players. I think a lot of chess players, especially ones who reach around our level, but not like the grandmaster level, we might feel like we're not that good at anything. Are you sure that you need to have a distinct strength?
Well, this is certainly something, as I said, different people have different experiences and different thoughts. I think it may help you to know for yourself what you're good in, and maybe you also know your weaknesses, but it's more sort of optimistic to know what your strengths are. So I think, for example, this friend of mine, Mike Splain, who held the chess parties, one of his great strengths, I think, was what I called incurable optimism. So And he would, in every game, he would ask himself, how am I going to win this game? And he would ask it even if the position was even. He would ask it even if he was losing, even if he was behind. He would still be asking, how am I going to win this game? And I was so amazed by this. It sort of hit me one time when he was going over one of his games at one of his parties, and he was in a bad position. And he said, "Here, well, I was thinking about how he's going to win the game." And I said, "Mike, how could you be thinking about that? Your position is a mess." But he, no matter what position he was in, he was trying to think about what steps he would need to take to make that a winning position. And it might be wishful thinking, but amazingly, just by focusing on it and thinking about the position that way, he would gradually convert the position into one he could win. And I talked about masters winning drawn games, winning lost games as a skill that I haven't really mastered yet, but Mike could really do that. He would get in bad positions and he would get out of it and he'd win. So that was his great strength. And so I asked him about this at the next chess party. I said, so you talked about asking, how am I going to win even when I'm losing? Are you really serious? And he said, yes, I'm serious about that. He really did that. And so I started calling it the Mike Explain question. And I referred to that over and over in my blog. And for me, I found it was helpful because what the Mike Explain question does, how am I going to win this game? It gets you past this myopic, just looking at the next move or the next couple moves, the next 3 moves. Instead, you're thinking, looking at the bigger picture, and you're saying, what needs to transpire over the board to make this a winning position? And as I wrote in my blog, it gives you like a North Star to sail towards. And it won't always work, but it's amazing how, like, if you're just always constantly pushing the game in that direction, like in the direction you want to go, gradually over time, that has an effect. And so like I could think of games where, like, not long after that, there's a game where, like, I just got this strong feeling. Okay, I was playing white. My opponent had a center with pawns on G7, F6, F5. So this strong, strong pawn chain. And I just had this feeling, if I break down that pawn chain, I'm going to checkmate him. And so I ended up by sacking a piece on E5, opening that diagonal and checkmating him. And it's like I predicted this like 10 or 15 moves in advance. But because that was, I just sort of had the feeling this was the way I was going to win the game. And sure enough, it was. So this may not work every time. It may not even work half the time. But if it happens enough, then you'll be winning games that you maybe wouldn't have won otherwise. So I'm a big believer in this question, and I definitely urge people to give it a try.
Yeah, and you've got some cool examples in the book too, where you look at a position that looks like it's relatively hopeless, but you ask yourself the question, and then it kind of becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does, yeah. So it really does.
Yeah. So I definitely appreciated that advice as well. And I wanted to transition. So I wrote a book as well, kind of like a compilation of all the interviews I've done. And I settled on sort of four non-negotiables, I would call them, in terms of things that people need to do to improve at chess. And I hadn't read your book or this post at the time, but it actually echoes pretty closely. I mean, not super surprisingly, what you give in your second set of advice. You start playing chess young, play in lots of tournaments, study your games, play stronger players and talk with stronger players, and just don't quit. Mine was the 4 pillars of chess improvement, and it was play serious games, review them, do tactics, and build a community, which we'll talk more about the parties you've mentioned and wrote about a couple times. So the primary difference that I noticed, well, number one, I do talk a lot about aging in chess and write about aging in chess, but I didn't explicitly say start chess young. But I do think it's an important point. If you want to make master in particular, a lot of people have done research. The making master is kind of the upper bound of what's been done. Only a handful of cases where people start as a full-fledged adults and make it to, say, the 2200-ish FIDE level. So that is something to keep in mind, but not something that should deter and take away from anyone's enjoyment of the game. But you did not mention any sort of tactical work, which of course, especially in the digital age, has become all the
Mhm.
rage.
Mhm. Yeah.
So do you think that all this do tactics, do you think that that's necessary advice or not,
Well, actually,
or
you might
maybe not?
remember in that first list of five, the oriented towards the chess players, I did say step one, getting to class A, getting from B or C to class A, is mostly just eliminating your tactical mistakes and also spotting the tactical mistakes of
Yeah.
your opponent. Um, and so I think clearly that shows tactics are important, and they're especially important for the people at that sort of middle level, the class C and B players who are trying to get to class A. So yeah, so there is a certain mechanical aspect to that. If one way to learn tactics is just to drill tactics a lot, and obviously there are many case studies of people who've succeeded that way. I think I never did really personally that sort of organized study of tactics. Of course, I was improving, I was getting into chess in the 1970s when you didn't really have computers. You didn't have all the abundant resources we have on the internet with Puzzle Rush and stuff like that. But I was always a pretty tactical player when I was starting out. That was somehow easier for me. And so maybe by virtue of what I liked in chess, I liked attacks, I liked tactics. So I sought those out. And over just experience, playing in a lot of games that way, I became fairly good at it. But I would say that, you know, perhaps I could have improved faster. Maybe I would have gotten better if I had taken a more organized approach. And if I'd had a chess coach, for example. I never had a chess coach. They didn't exist back in the 70s, except maybe if you lived in New York.
Right.
So, and then by the time I was an adult, I was sort of like set in my ways and not really eager to take advice from a coach, which may be a mistake. But anyway, so possibly having a coach, possibly having a dedicated study program would have gotten me over some humps faster. But in any case, definitely, I agree. Tactics are important, and they're sort of, I see them as a means to an end. I think you're really getting, close to mastery, or maybe getting there, when you can use tactics in the service of a positional goal. So that I think is sort of the optimal merger of the two. So when I was a player, I was playing a lot of tactics, but not really having a strategic goal for them. And so that was kind of the next step to get you to expert and master. Okay, so go ahead,
Yeah.
ask me what you want to.
And then something, well, I was just going to reiterate that I like the framework of
Yeah,
eliminating mistakes, but
yeah.
something else unique in your history is that you made it to USCF Master, but then deep into your chess career in your 40s or 50s, you lost over 100 points to fall
Yeah,
below 2100 USCF,
yeah.
and then managed to regain 100 points to get over
Yeah.
2200 again. Now, Todd Bryant, who I saw he weighed in your comments at
Mhm.
some point. Todd's done a lot of research
Mhm.
about what rating gains are possible at different ages. He's got a
Mhm.
couple posts on chess.com. I also interviewed him about it. Definitely recommend listeners check that stuff out. But one point that Todd has highlighted that I think gets overlooked sometimes is just sort of the natural randomness and fluctuation. As a math professor, obviously,
Mhm.
you would know
Yeah.
this well, of results. If you have a given strength and you play a lot of games, the strength you display in a given set is going to fluctuate within a pretty wide range. So what I'm getting at is I'm wondering, do you think something really concrete changed
Yeah.
where when you went from 2250 to below to 2100 and then back up, or do you think it was mostly just noise?
Okay. So I do think something changed, and partly it's because of the time scales that we're talking about. I was I was master over 2200 for around 5, 6, 7 years in my 30s. And then, I dropped below 2200 when I was maybe 36, 35. And just couldn't get back up over 2200 again, and just sort of had a very gradual decrease. And yeah, there is fluctuation where you have good tournaments and bad tournaments. The fluctuations tend to be, for me, okay, maybe not for others, but for me, tended to be in the order of 30 or 40 rating points. Um, but to have a slow and steady drop of 100 and then a quicker rise of 100. I thought both of those meant something. And in the case of the drop, I think it's hard to define what happens as you get older, why you're not winning as much as you used to, and why your rating is a little bit lower. But it really does happen. I mean, if when I look at all my friends who were like masters or experts in the 80s, if they stayed in chess, and I look at their ratings now, they've all gone down 100 or 200 points. Players who are strong, who are
Yeah.
good 2400 players in their 30s, by the time they get to their 50s, they're in the 2200s and sometimes struggling to stay above their rating floor. So definitely, getting older, I do think you start losing some of your ability. I think maybe some of it's tactical. You're not as alert anymore. I don't know. You're not as, maybe also not as fearless. Like when I was in my 20s, I didn't know what I was doing and it didn't matter. I was just like, I'm going for the victory.
Right.
Nowadays, I play a little more like an older man, and I sort of am more careful. I'm more aware of what can go wrong, and so maybe I miss out on some of those opportunities that I had in my 20s just by playing, all out, going for the gusto, sort of. So somehow I think I don't fully understand what exactly causes your rating drop when you get to your 40s and 50s, but it's definitely there. And you can even, I asked you in an email, can you even think of any grandmaster who improved in their 50s? I can't think of one. I
Yeah. I
actually
mean,
did.
yeah.
Yeah, I looked up at one point when I was still writing my blog, I did a post, I'll have to look for it, on people who had the latest rating peaks. And like there were a couple people who maybe had their peaks in their early 40s, but no grandmasters had peaks in their 50s. So now, for any listeners who are in their 50s and want to improve, it is possible. First of all, if you're starting out in your 50s, then there's much you can learn and you can catch up and gain quite a bit. But if you've been a lifelong player, it's going to be really hard to improve in your 50s. Um, and that's sort of the context where I did improve by 100 points in my 50s. And I feel that what really helped me was these chess parties that I told you about, my explains. It was the chance to really talk seriously about chess and think about the thinking process. And that's somehow something that not too many people talk about. People don't think about thinking. What is it that you do when you're coming up with chess moves? And so one thing we did at these chess parties was develop a list of questions to ask. And I actually put them as a appendix in my book because I think they're really good. 10 questions for strategic or schematic thinking. And some of these were things.
Could you read a couple of
Yeah,
them just to give?
I'll read
just
them.
to give listeners a taste.
It's not like they're super original, but just remembering to ask these questions is really important. So one of them, where are the pawn breaks? Okay, now I know what a pawn break is, but a few years ago, I heard Robert Hess giving talking about a game. I was watching him. I forget, it was some tournament he was commenting on or world championship. I forget, but he at one point said, when I sit down to evaluate a position, the first thing I look at is the pawn breaks. And I'm like, what?
Right.
I might see the pawn breaks, but he says that's the first thing he looks at. That tells him who's got more flexibility in their position and more opportunities to open things up. If you might have a great position, but if you don't have any pawn breaks, you're going to sit there and not be able to improve the position. Whereas, if you got the pawn breaks, you've got the levers to sort of improve your position. So that really impressed me that grandmaster like him would say that's his number one question. Okay, another question. What are the best and worst placed pieces for me and my opponent? And this is something that I remember reading about in Jonathan Rowson's books. He says, talk to your pieces. So ask, which piece isn't doing anything? And so if you're sitting there, boy, I remember in my 20s, I felt like the worst part of my game was, what do I do after the opening? I'm sitting there on move 15, move 20. I'm out of the opening. What do I do next? How do I formulate a plan? And so this is a good practical advice. Take a look at your position. Talk to your pieces. Who's not happy? Which piece isn't doing anything? And then try to give that piece something to do. And Another one, Jesse Kraai is another guy who talks about this a lot. He talks about angry pieces, pieces that aren't doing enough. So good players use that as a strategy for coming up with ways to improve their position. So that's another one. Okay, third one, where are the targets? So look at the position, see what targets are there in your position, your opponent's position. And of course, then if you can identify what they are, then that helps you formulate a plan. So, okay, that one may seem obvious, but still. Fourth one, what are the possible trades and which ones are good for me? So, and I think it's something that a lot of beginners, intermediate level players absolutely do not have a clue about, that there's no such thing as an even trade. And we, when we're teaching kids, we say, okay, knight for bishop, that's an even trade, or bishop and 2 pawns for rook, maybe. So we use this point count thing, but there's almost no such thing as an even trade. Every piece can have certain pluses or minuses over the other piece. In that particular position, this knight may be better than that bishop, or this bishop may be better than that knight. And so really looking at your trades, never play an automatic trade. Think about the trade. Think about how it affects the position. I think that's a huge thing that amateurs can use to improve their games, because I see a lot of the time when I'm working with middle level players, they kind of automatically trade. They say, oh, there's a trade, I'll play it. But no, you have to think about that trade and what it does. So those are some examples. I had some others here too. Which side of the board should I play on? Who has a safer king? These are fairly common things, but just to remind yourself of those every now and then. One that I contributed was, are there any time-sensitive advantages? And I have a big comment on that in a game that Jesse Kraai went over with me. But that's one where I felt it was, my friend who ran these parties, I felt this was one of his weaknesses. So he loved looking at the structure of a position and, identifying the targets, identifying good squares for the pieces and stuff. All of those things, though, were things that you could take advantage of with oodles of time. There's plenty of time to do this. But sometimes there are advantages that you got to use right now, or else you'll lose it. So, for example, your opponent's king is stuck in the middle of the board, but he's going to be able to castle in 1 or 2 moves. If you can come up with something right then to keep him in the middle of the board, that will change the course of the game. Being aware of time-sensitive advantages, I felt sometimes Mike wouldn't do that enough. And that was a big part of my game. I really liked to sort of strike when the iron is hot and have a sense of that. So that may be, and we talked again about knowing your strengths and weaknesses, that may be a strength of mine. And maybe these slow maneuvering things were a weakness of mine. And of course, you can work on both of those things, so you can use your strengths when they're appropriate, and you can also try to improve on your weaknesses.
Yeah, a lot of good advice there. And I wanted to follow up a little bit, Dana, on the chess parties you've mentioned many times. So, and which come up in your book, and obviously were quite instrumental. So a couple things. One is, as you mentioned in the book, like there was kind of a rating cutoff. Like this was like an offshoot of a club that you were playing at, and you kind of had to earn your way in. Mm-hmm. So one, I'm curious what advice you might have for still developing players who wouldn't be at that level yet, looking to develop a more sort of vibrant community where they can benefit from the expertise of people maybe the next rung up. Mm-hmm. And then I'll ask another one later, but let's stop there.
Yeah. So the chess parties were really a unique thing that Mike came up with this idea, and I really want to encourage listeners, if you are if you can think about organizing something like this in your hometown, whether it's people at a club or whatever, or maybe it's just friends of yours, but have a regular get together. We did it once a month, and that was enough to make it a regular part of our schedule. It's like, okay, this is coming around again. And you could start thinking about, what game would I like to show? Or what do I want to talk about? What questions do I want to ask? So unique things about Mike's parties. Yeah, he did it by invitation. So he was a national master. He was particularly interested in talking about chess at a master level. But he did want to bring in people who were a little bit below the master level so that so we could pull them up. And we would, I mean, it's a great thing. Once these parties started going, we kind of felt we had this little community where if one of us made an expert rating for the first time, it was like, this is a triumph for all of us. Yay, good job, you got to 2000. Um, so so I love the community aspect that this was, giving us a chance to look beyond our own individual successes and failures, but to address, all of us, so, when we're watching, person X go over their games, we can be giving him advice and helping out, and vice versa. When I talk about my game, I'll get advice from that person. So the cutoff, Mike's cutoff was Class A. So he invited Class A players, he invited experts, and of course masters. But I think he felt that below Class A would A, maybe not benefit as much because we might be beyond their level, and B, maybe we would be spending too much time talking about things that were obvious to the experts and masters, but not obvious to the B players and C players. So whether this was a good idea or not, you definitely could debate, but that's the way he did it. So we were kind of all at a similar level, and I thought it worked really well because no one was bored. Like I said, we're all at a similar level and we're all benefiting from this discussion.
Well, one thing is, I guess at the lower level, it's just something where if you're playing in a local community, it's come up on the podcast. There's, postmortems don't play the role they used to be, but I think it's worth some effort wherever you're playing to try to arrange a get together, even if it's not at someone's house. Just, maybe if you're playing a weekly round robin, maybe the last Wednesday of every month, you guys all go to a bar after the game or whatever it might be. But I do think that you're really onto something. And I was curious, just because you refer to them as parties, but the way you describe them, they almost sound like lectures. So I'm curious, was there like drinking and drugs and debauchery going on, or was this just like chess analysis?
No. Well, so we did have pizza and we had lots of munchies. So that's obligatory to have plenty of food around for people to eat. And we had drinks, but soft drinks. We didn't, we weren't doing anything alcoholic. So what I would say, actually, well, the title of my book is, Did You Come Here to Play Chess or Have Fun? And having fun is part of it. But what I meant to convey with this title, the answer is both. You could do both at the same time. And so the parties were serious. We were going over our games, and sometimes we would, we would be very frank. You're like, this is a stupid idea that you're doing, or whatever. Or one person would strongly believe one thing, another person strongly believe another thing, and then we'd, have a discussion or maybe an argument. So I wouldn't say it was like a lecture because of the fact there's so much exchange going on of viewpoints. There was one person I mentioned in the book, one stronger player who came regularly, a guy named Craig Marr, whose peak rating was like in the 25. And so he's played like all the big name people in the West Coast, at least. When Craig showed his games, it tended to get a little bit more lecture-like. And I think, we sort of had some deference to his rating and stuff. But the nice thing was he really prepared his games, his presentations well. So he had a specific point he wanted to make. And to some extent, we didn't want to get in the way of his making that point. So that was a little bit more lecture-like. But we really appreciated having him there. And so we were definitely willing to do that. As far as the rest of us, it was definitely not lecture. It was Socratic dialogue at its best, So we were asking questions, we were disagreeing, etc., having to defend our point of view. So it was serious talk about chess, but at the same time, it was fun because we were learning about how different people think and how they approach positions. So I'd really encourage people to, whatever level you're at, maybe you're meeting once a week to play speed chess. Think about maybe taking one of those weeks and instead of playing speed chess, go over your games, show your games, your recent tournament games, recent online games, maybe, especially losses. Like if you lose a game where you don't understand why you lost, what did I do wrong here? That would be a great thing to bring to the chess party. And you can ask people and get their opinions. You might get 5 different opinions, but at least you'll have something to work with. So I believe that what was really great about Mike's parties was the combination of seriousness about chess, that we're all trying to improve our game, but at the same time, we're having fun doing it, and we enjoy each other's company. And let's and we'll have pizza and we'll chat a little bit too. One thing he always did at the beginning was just go around and have everybody introduce themselves. And for the new people, that way, if there's someone who hasn't been there before, they get introduced right away. And even if we've been there 20 times before, he would still have us tell us something new about yourself. So tell us something that we didn't know yet. And so you get to know them pretty well. And so for Mike, definitely the community was a big part of it. And so I think whatever level you're at, you can build that community. I strongly suggest that you do something like this on a regular basis with a regular bunch of people. And maybe the idea of limiting the rating range so that you're all kind of dealing with the same issues, that might be helpful as well. But don't be afraid to get in, talk with stronger people, because I think they're the ones you learn the most from.
Yeah, lots of great advice there. And I think there's been a lot that whatever level you're at, when you're trying to reach the next one, there's a lot that you can learn from Dana's book and from what we've discussed. But your book is not just about chess improvement by any
That's
means.
true.
There's a lot of fun stories in
Yes.
it as well. And one of them, actually, I think it touches on chess improvement. So this unbelievable story of your game against famed Grandmaster Walter Brown, who is no longer with us. Legendarily eccentric and obviously quite accomplished as well.
Yeah.
Could you tell the story of this game, Dana?
I would love to tell you that. So as we've said, this book is based on a blog that I wrote, and so there are all kinds of chapters in this book. Some about improvements, some telling stories, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just trying to kind of perpetuate the spirit of the blog and talk about what was the things I enjoyed the most. So there are a lot of stories in this book. So the one you talked about was the first game, actually the only game I played against Grandmaster Walter Brown. Had a very strange thing happen during this game. So this was in the 1999 California State Championship last round. And I'd done really well. To be paired against Walter Brown in the last round means I must be doing pretty well. And so basically I was in a situation where if I drew the game, I would win the under 2,300 prize. So Brown, on the other hand, was in a situation where a draw is no good for him. He has to win the game in order to win the tournament, or tie for first or something. So that's kind of a scene setting thing. So we're playing this game. I had this one point in the game where Brown actually kind of missed something, a nice little pawn, actually a pawn break that I found that he could have stopped any time but didn't. And so I got a really nice initiative out of this, and we got to an end game that was very advantageous for me. And right on move 30, which is the time control, Walter Brown offers me a draw. And of course, he was, I think he had probably just finished the time, made his 30th move. So he'd finished the time scramble. And I thought about it, and I didn't think too long. I said, yeah, I'll take the draw. And he blew his top. He said, you should not have taken that draw. And I was like, what? What? He was upset that I had taken his draw offer. And he was, was going off, talking with the tournament director and talking with other players, and said, I'm never going to play a game with draw odds again, because he's referring to the fact that I didn't need to play to win. All I needed was a draw. But I tell you, it was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen, that he offers a draw and then lights into me for accepting this draw. And so I tried to understand, and I asked many people what they thought. And when I told the story in my blog, I asked other people too, why did he react this way? So my thinking at the time was that this was supposed to be a tactical draw offer, that I was not supposed to accept it, but it's supposed to put me in a psychological mindset where now I've turned down the draw, and so I have to really try to win, and I have to force it. And maybe he's expecting that I'll then do something wrong, or maybe I'll get nervous and start making mistakes. So that was the explanation, that the only explanation that could make sense to me. And then the reason he was upset was that the psychology was wrong. I didn't need a win. All I needed for my prize was a draw. And so it's like, he's giving me a gift, offering a draw. Sure, I'll take it. And so his whole tactical draw offer that might have worked against a master at his level didn't work against me, because a draw was all I needed. And I don't know if that was it. There were some good comments on the blog. One guy said that, on the blog post, one guy said, Walter Brown, of course, every game he got in this serious, huge time pressure, and he would be so hyper. I mean, he'd be really, bouncing up and down in his chair and blitzing out the moves and stuff like that. So that, I mean, his adrenaline must have been just like at skyrocketing levels. And so what this commenter said was, I think he was just speaking from a point of view where he's still got that adrenaline pumping, and really he was mad at himself. This is what my reader suggested, that he wasn't mad at you. He was mad at himself, but the way he expressed this was to lash out at me, at the tournament director, for pairing against somebody who didn't need to win, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that was a very insightful comment, and that may be what was going on there. And, maybe in retrospect, I've probably behaved that way sometimes too, like in the immediate aftermath of a game that you've lost, a really tough defeat, or a draw where you should have won, or something like that. Sometimes it's easy to lose your equanimity and act out a little bit. And I think we probably all do that. And maybe Walter did it maybe more than others, because he was so
He might have done it
jazzed.
more than others.
So anyway, that's my story.
But not the only story of him.
Right.
Yeah. Not the only story of him losing his temper, but I just thought it was hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you expect when you offer a draw? And it's come up on the podcast. Like, the psychological draw offer is definitely a thing. I've advised lower rated players, and it's advice to myself too. If someone hundreds of points higher rated than you offers a draw, you should smell a rat. Like, they're probably your default. Like, of course, you want to relieve the tension, the rating points, maybe prizes, but your default setting should be like, I must be better at minimum. But the idea of like, and people do these psychological draw offers as like, well, kind of either they take it when I'm worse, or I can shift the psychology. And I've been the victim of that in a game or two. But the idea of actually getting mad that they take it was just hilarious.
It was like taking it to the extreme. Yeah. Yeah. I had another, I have another chapter in this book with, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have another chapter in the book that was kind of a similar situation. So the chapter, my game with Sergei Kudrin, although it doesn't have this amusing ending, but of him getting mad, but I showed in the book, I played a game against Kudrin, where he offers a draw, and it was a really complex game where I'd sacrificed my queen very early on in this opening variation I love called the Prince Gambit, and managed to get pretty good compensation for it. And his position kind of gradually got a little bit worse. And then at one point he offers a draw. And again, there's the last round of a tournament. Again, I only needed a draw to win my class prize under 2,300. And so I accepted it. But like you said, I should have smelled a rat, because he made this draw offer after playing a really bad move, and his move, the move he made on the board, I had a completely won game. And if I had only sort of calmed down my emotions and looked at this objectively, and and realized that he'd blundered, which is something you don't expect a grandmaster to do, but I should have smelled a rat. And I do regret that one, taking that draw off for a little bit, because if I had, I probably would have won the game, and that would have been my first lifetime victory over a GM. So that's still on my bucket list.
Yeah, same here. Yeah. Yeah, good lesson there for everyone. And a couple more stories as we wrap up. Just a couple that I
Sure.
couldn't
Yeah.
resist asking you to share.
Sure.
Number one, you had some interesting perspective, coming from the Bay Area on a young Hans Niemann. So you
Yeah. Yeah.
encountered him when he was these days famously lived in the
Yeah.
Bay Area, then moved to the Netherlands, then ended up in Connecticut and the East Coast. But you encountered him when he was just starting out.
Yeah.
What did you encounter?
Yeah, yeah. So one of my posts is about him, and the funny thing is, I wrote this post in like 2015, like 7 years
Right.
before anybody, the chess world, sort of paid attention to him. And uh, I think the first time I saw him, believe it or not, he was playing against Walter Brown, and Walter Brown won
Hmm.
that game, a very impressive game. Uh, but I was. It was a very complicated game. I was quite impressed by this little kid who was maybe 13 at the time or 14, I don't know, um, playing against Walter Brown on a top board and having this really exciting game. Um, so then maybe it was a year or so later, I saw a tournament game of his where he won in the two knights versus one pawn endgame. And this is, of course, a classic, incredibly difficult endgame where, if you have king and two knights against king, it's a draw. Always, you can't force the win. But if the guy happens to have a pawn, there are positions where you can actually force a checkmate. And there's a guy named Troitsky in the early 1900s who figured out exactly where the pawn has to be for there to be a win for the guy with the two knights. It's called the Troitsky line. And it's not really a line, it's this funny shaped thing that looks like a W. So the Niemann story is he got to this end game in a tournament game against another 2300 player, another kid actually, and he was able to win it in spite of the fact that it was not even supposed to be winnable. So his opponent's pawn was past the Troitsky line. Was one step past the Troitsky line. So his opponent is supposed to be able to draw this. Nevertheless, Niemann won it. He won it in under 50 moves. So, beating the 50 move rule. So, so I asked him about it afterwards. Did you know how to do this? And did you know where the Troitsky line was? And did you know it was past the Troitsky line? And he said, yeah, he knew it. And he even knew, so in this position, the reason it was technically a book draw, is there are four different corners of the chessboard the defender's king can run to. Only one of them saves the draw. If he heads for one of the other three corners, he loses. And anybody playing the position would head for one of the wrong corners because they are the far corners. And you'd think that your king would be harder to mate if it's farther away, but it's not true. The knights are good at covering that different distance. You actually head for the near corner in this one. And Niemann told me, yeah, I knew that. And I knew the winning procedure if he was in one of the other corners, and I knew that he should head for the near corner. So, and I just was amazed because this guy is 13, 14. When I was growing up, 14-year-olds didn't know anything about endgames. That's how older people
Right.
beat younger people, is they head for an endgame and they win because they know the endgames. Not true anymore. So this kid knew that endgame better than Troitsky did. And I was just stunned by that. And, at that moment, I felt this kid is going to go somewhere. And, and so when the whole controversy came up and people were saying, oh, it's so suspicious that he gained 200 rating points in 1 year, and it's suspicious that he did this and that and the other, I'm just laughing because I saw Niemann when he was a kid, and he was just obviously unbelievably motivated and very, very talented and spent a huge amount of time studying. So to me, yeah, okay, I know he admitted that he cheated in some online games, and I do not condone that. And he said it was the worst mistake of his life. I take his word for that. But don't say he's not talented. He's a mega talent, and he got where he got by means of hard work. And yeah, he's got some personality issues maybe. I definitely don't approve of cheaters, but I believe when he said he's not cheated in any over the board tournament, because he doesn't need to. He doesn't need to.
Yeah. And as we record this, April 23rd, there's never ending Hans drama, but he dropped out of this big freestyle tournament, which was kind of odd when they changed the cheating procedure, and he has not explained his side of the story. So I don't know what his side of the story is, but that wasn't a great look. He hasn't taken, in the other drama, the lie detector test after losing a match to Dubov. So I've overall been very sympathetic to Hans and agree with your point. He's extremely talented. No one can take that away from him. But yeah, been some mysterious actions lately, at least. But in any event, I'd also, and regular listeners of the podcast will also have heard some stories, but I had as well of what a special talent he was coming up. And one more story for the road, Dana.
Yes.
A lot of listeners are, I'm friendly with the people at Chess Dojo. Jesse Kraai has been on the podcast a couple of times, and you took an outsized lesson from Jesse's famed analog approach to chess. Could you tell that story as well?
Jesse and I know we have a little bit of a history together. So we first met each other at a Reno tournament in 2006, where I played for the first time that I know of in world history, played this Prince Gambit, a Queen Sacrifice variation against international master David Proust, and I won that game. And Jesse was watching the game with great interest and was just fascinated by it because I sacked my queen on move 6, eventually won the queen back 30 moves later. And after the game, he said, "This is the greatest game ever," and blah, blah, blah. He's very excitable. So anyway, he invited me to give a lecture at a website called changes..com, which he was one of the founders of, one of the first lecturers on that website. And so I gave a lecture on that game, which was very popular. And then he gave kind of a response to my lecture where he goes over this famous game by Nishmetdinov with the queen sacrifice very early on move 12, I think, where again, sacrificing a queen for 2 pieces and a lot of really unclear counterplay. So anyway, so I'm gradually working up to the point anyway. So Jesse and I knew each other from working on chesslecture.com, giving lectures. First of all, let me say, I think Jesse is the best chess lecturer I have ever seen. He's so calm and philosophical and has this great way of expressing himself. So if you've never seen Jesse lecture, you really owe it to yourself. He's now on this Chess Dojo channel on YouTube. So anyway, so we were both lecturing a chess lecture for a while, and he offers to lecture on one of my games. And I say, "Wow, this is great. Sure, I'd love to have you do that." And so he did. Well, so first part of the story is, he said, "First, I want you to go over the game yourself, write out notes on it and send me the notes. Do not use a computer." Okay, so I did that, and I sent him, I think it was probably about 4 pages of notes. I've always considered myself to be ridiculously, what's the word? I don't want to say it. That I ridiculously overdid the self-analysis, the analysis of my games. So I said it's a great way of improving. I mean, I think it's very, very important. So for a very long time, I would go over every tournament game I played in detail, and I'd have a page full of notes. Okay, so I was proud of myself for the amount of detail of my notes. So I sent the notes off to Jesse. He writes back, he says, "That's it? That's all?" And it's like, I
Right.
sent him 4 pages of notes, and he says, "That's all." He says that every game he plays, he writes at least 10 pages of notes on. And so right there, I thought, wow, there is the difference between a grandmaster and a national master. So he definitely felt I had not done sufficient work on the analysis. And he backed it up because in his lecture, he pointed out the worst move I made in the game, I had not commented on at all because I thought it was an automatic move. And that was something that was really a stunner to me, that, this harmless move, he said, that's the worst move you played the whole game. Because that kind of threw my position away, and the piece was well placed where it was. I didn't need to move it again. So anyway, and that was only part of it. He basically ripped to shreds. Ripped my game completely to shreds,
Right.
to the point where all the people on chesslecture.com who loved my lectures were like, this was so unfair, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, I thought it was great. because Jesse calls himself the sensei. I agree. What do you want from a sensei? You don't want them to go easy on you, to be nice. You want them to be merciless and say, what did I do wrong? And
Right.
he found a bunch of things I did wrong. But also there's one thing where he said, poo-pooed something I wrote, a very tactical line with a piece sack that he said, "Well, you're just losing a piece." And I said, "No, Jesse, you're not just. I'm not just losing a piece. Look at all this play I'm getting, and so forth." I'm quite convinced I was right on that. But that part, that discussion actually led to a discovery for me, because as I was trying to formulate, why did I miss this peace sacrifice? Why didn't I come up with it? He said, it's irrelevant if you never thought of it during the game. So I was trying to think about how could I have come up with this during the game? And that's when I came up with this question of what are the time-dependent imbalances in a position? So remember, that was one of the questions I said we developed from the chess parties, and that was my contribution.
Yeah.
So basically, my opponent had a couple of time-sensitive weaknesses. His king was in the center. There was a file that I needed to open at any cost. So if I had looked at the position from that point of view, what do I need to do now that I'll lose the opportunity for? Then I feel certain I would have found this peace sacrifice. So this was a great case of synchronicity, or of sort of two minds working together. So the fact that he criticized my move so harshly forced me to think about forced me to think about why do I think this is a good move, and how could I have come up with it? And it led me to a new general principle that I had not really enunciated before. So I think that's the best kind of chess teaching, or teaching of any kind, is the kind that makes you think and it makes you come up with your own ideas. And so I'm so grateful to Jesse for the way he handled that. And even if he was wrong about that move, that it taught me something really important about chess.
Yeah. Shout out to Jesse. Great teacher. I agree. I love his. And obviously these days, of course, you can find his stuff all over YouTube. So we're all spoiled for choice. Well, Dana, congrats on the book. I really enjoyed it. Any
I'll hold it up
parting
again.
thoughts? There's plenty more we didn't discuss, but we'll leave some meat on the bone for listeners.
Yeah, some good surprises for the So I guess no, I have nothing particular to add, except that I do hope that, as I said, the message of the book is that you can be serious and you can have fun. And I think this book is different from almost any other chess book I've seen, because chess books tend to be so serious, but they don't allow the fun quotient to come in. So sometimes I think they should just lighten up a little bit. So this is my attempt to write a serious chess book that is nevertheless light and enjoyable and fun to read. And there are chapters in this book that don't have chess analysis in them at all, that are just telling stories.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of readers will enjoy that. The story of the Fischer-Reshevsky match. I know you like that one. That's a fascinating story. There's a great diversity of topics and I think that people will have fun reading this book, and maybe having fun will actually help the lessons in the book sink in a little bit better. Because if you're not working that hard, if you're enjoying it, then sometimes the lessons are easier that way.
Yeah, well said. And the book is called "Did You Come Here to Play Chess or Have Fun?" And I just want to echo what Dana said. It's nice, light reading. There are portions where he goes through entire chess games, but I don't think you necessarily need a chess set. So more good chess bedtime reading, as we're all often looking for.
That's right.
So Dana, congratulations, and thanks for coming on.
Okay, well, thanks for inviting me, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.